We know about the culture wars and the long march through the institutions, the cultural institutions over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Sal Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, the Frankfurt School, those sort of things. We know about that. But what's really been happening, and if you step back and look at it, what's really been happening is a gradual overtaking of the minds of younger people and disseminating that cultural manifesto into society, into all spheres of culture, government, media, entertainment, education, family, and so on, and the breaking down of boundaries. But I want to just bring to your attention one area that I think is crucially important, and that is the overtaking of the mind through language. So we have the apprehension of words, the changing of meaning in words, and the limiting of choice for people like you and me. For example, misinformation. What is misinformation? That word is now becoming very common in our culture and spoken about online and so on. But think about it for a moment. You do not get charged for giving misinformation. You get charged for giving false evidence. If you go to court and you give false evidence when you're required to give true evidence under oath, that's a problem. You don't give misinformation. It's either true or it's false. So when you go online and you say something which is truthful and accurate and backed up with data and evidence, you can get deplatformed for misinformation. It's a nonsense. It's actually not a word. It has no meaning other than the meaning that they assign to it, which is you're giving information we don't like. We get it. We understand what's really going on. It's not about truth. It's not about fact. It's about narrative. So do we agree with this word misinformation, or do we say no? Well, I'm suggesting to you we say no, because it's not misinformation, it's truth. It's truthful, accurate data. When you give data about adverse events, if you give data about the WEF, if you give data about what's going on in the courts or the schools, if you give information, if you give case studies, if you give coroner's reports, if you give anything like that, and it's truthful, it is not misinformation. On the phone the other day, somebody said, oh, that's misinformation. I don't even know what that is. So I'm suggesting to you we reject these words that are being imposed. The other word is hate speech. I mean, what is hate speech? In Ireland right now, they've just passed a bill which will come into law and it come into effect around about January or February perhaps of next year. It's criminalising hate speech. They're defining what hate speech is and criminalising it. 5 years, up to maximum 5 years jail for hate speech. So no longer is it just offensive or socially unacceptable, it's criminal. So if you go on social media in Ireland come January, February, and you make statements which they deem to be hate speech / misinformation, you could go to jail for 5 years. The same thing is happening with the online safety bill in the UK, where the definition of what is unacceptable, what is misinformation, is actually being defined by bureaucrats and imposed upon the people with no consultation other than with activist groups who have a political agenda. So we need to be very careful about the words that we accept and take into our culture. Do not accept the word misinformation, do not use it. That would be my counsel, because these words will box us in and we have no way out. So when the same-sex laws came in 2017, it was all about love. Well, you need to define what love is. It isn't all about love, it's all about progressive activism now, and the retreat lines are being pushed back, pushed back, pushed back, and language is being used as a very powerful weapon against people with traditional and conservative and Christian values.
Legal to talk about, perfectly legal to give speeches about, but which you, if this bill is passed, can't talk about on the internet without a number of government controls being imposed. I think there are two big things wrong with that. First of all, we should not be imposing criminal liabilities on internet companies for things that we can't define, even in a statute which is several hundred pages long. The second problem about it is that it confers the kind of powers on government ministers which they should not have. It basically requires Ofcom, the telecommunications regulator, to supervise this very complicated process. And the vagueness of the statute is going to be given precision by so-called guidance coming from Ofcom. And the guidance depends in part on what government ministers want. They have to submit it to government ministers who can change it. We know some of the things that government ministers will want to introduce. They call it misinformation and disinformation. Now, what is harmful and what is misinformation and disinformation? We had an example of this in the pandemic. There was a great deal of controversy about the lockdown, some controversy about vaccines, and basically anything which is contrary to government policy is capable of being labelled as misinformation and disinformation. Personally, I do not think that the government should have power to identify the kind of things which people are allowed to speak about on the internet. They don't have that power.
So let's be very careful about what words we accept, what words we take into our everyday use, because these words and this thinking is actually driving and advancing a political, social and cultural agenda. Behind that is a spiritual agenda, and we can talk about that another time. But going back to the overtaking of the mind, what we need to do is renew our mind, and if there is a spiritual context to this, there is a spiritual backdrop to this contest, then what we need to understand is we need to renew and protect our minds with the truth. We need to keep ourselves refreshed and in the space ready for this contest, because it is more than cultural, it is more than social, it is more than political, but language is being used as javelins to take out the people who would stand up against this onslaught. Thanks for watching.